Hey guys, Wavejump here, and welcome back to another video. And first off, before I start this off, I want to say sorry if my voice doesn't sound normal today. I'm just a bit sick. And also, again, as always, thank you to my patrons on Patreon for supporting me. Thank you currently to Shatter. And of course, if you would like to support me on Patreon, you can click on the link in the description or on the end card at the end of the video. Alright, so continuing on here, we are going to be covering me, replace item, and also game rules. So game rules will be the main thing about this, but me is a not super important command, and replace item is a fairly important command. Alright, so as I said, the first command we'll be covering is me, and the me command is really simple. As far as I remember as well, this can't even be used in a command block, so as I'll show you here, oh, actually you can. But anyways, the way the /me command works, you do /me and then a bunch of text. So what it'll do is it'll star your name and then a bunch of other text. So I could do me says hi, and now it says Wavejump game says hi. Pretty simple. Or I could do me says hi from the command block, and because I didn't rename the command block, it just says @says hi. Pretty simple, and the reason my name has a color is because I'm in a scoreboard team. Alright, so moving on here, and sorry for the random audio peaking here. I'm trying to keep it at a normal level. We're going to be moving on to the Replaceitem command, and I'm not sure what's exactly what's up with the weird audio here, but anyways, yeah. So the Replaceitem command allows you to replace any item in a player or entity's inventory, or even a block's inventory with something else. So say for example, I wanted to not I'm setting for block or check. I'm you could tell when I'm tired. All right, so I still enjoy making these videos. The syntax for replace item is replace item entity / block, and then there's a bit more info, but it doesn't show that for some reason in the syntax. Alright, say for example I wanted to do replace item block, right? So I'm replacing, and then the block's coordinates are 14, 5, 1, 46. Again, I'm just getting those using tab. So I'm replacing an item in that chest right there, and then slot dot, and you'll notice there are a bunch of different information here. But if I did, for example, slot dot horse dot chest, nothing would happen because it's not a horse. So what I want to do is slot dot container, because a chest is a container, and dot one, and then the item name. So for example, I'm gonna do an acacia fence gate. So there, you know, now the second slot, which you'll notice it said 1, and I'll explain that in just a second, has been replaced with an acacia fence gate. Alright, so why did it not replace the first slot and instead replace the second slot if I did slot.container.1? Well, the way programming works, typically when you're filling things in, there is 0 as the first slot and 1 is the second slot. So that's essentially why. Fairly simple, but pretty important nevertheless. Alright, so in order to replace an item for an entity, for example, I could do replace item entity, and you'll notice. So then selector, so I'm going to do Wavejump games slot, so I'm going to do slot dot let's do hotbar dot 1, so that, or actually let's do slot dot hotbar dot 0, so I can demonstrate that that the first slot is 0. The item, right, in this amount data tag is the same on the other thing. So I could, for example, do a log, and then I will do the amount, which will be what, or actually no, let's do 43. And then I could do any other data, like 1, for example, which makes it for spruce wood, or 0, which gives it oak wood. So yeah, you got the point there. And the reason why this can be extremely helpful is if you're, say, a map maker and want to make it so that if a player receives an item, it'll automatically be replaced with the version that, say, for example, can break something else. Instead of using clear and then give, you could just use replace item, which is a lot easier. Alright, so that's that, and now we're going to move on to a different world here. And this next world here will be our structure blocks world, where we're going to go ahead and go through all of the main game rules, because the game rules are fairly important, especially when you're starting out a world. I'll also let you know which game rules I typically turn on, because game rules are important. And yeah, sorry for any lag right now. Alright, so when you type in game rule, you'll notice you have a bunch of different game rules. You have command block output, disable leech removement check, all this stuff, right? Alright, so I'm going to go through them one by one. So the first one is command block output. And this one is one you will always want to set to false. Always. Because otherwise, say for example, I have a repeating command block somewhere in my world, And if we're, for example, to be scoreboard, players, set, Wavejump games, uh, scoreboard. Actually, let me add an objective first. And of course, I do have an episode on scoreboard if you haven't checked it out already. Okay, I almost crashed there. So, add, test, and then dummy. Okay, so now I could do scoreboard, players set at a test 1. And if I were to set this to be a repeating command block, actually let me do add at a test 1, so that, it keeps going up. You'll get spammed in chat, and you don't want that, so you're going to do /gamerule, command block output false, and now I know if I go scoreboard objective set, let's say sidebar test, I can still see that the number is going up, but it's not going to bother me in chat. Alright, so moving on here, and I'm going to go ahead and clear the sidebar. We have the disable leader movement check. Alright, so another one you may find useful is do daylight cycle. So currently I have that on true, and basically what that means is that the sun will move. You'll notice you can see the sun moving perfectly normal. So I could set it, for example, to nighttime, right, and the sun and moon will move. But what I could do is I could change do daylight cycle to false. And you'll notice now the sun and moon are both in the sky in frozen position. So you could use this to freeze the sun and moon in position, just like that. It's very, very nice and pretty helpful. Alright, so the do entity drops command, it's actually pretty simple. So what you need to do is, this will work for certain items. For example, a painting. So what would normally happen, not painting, is if I were in survival mode, and let me change do entity drops to true. You'll notice when I break this painting, it drops painting. But when that's set to false, you'll notice nothing drops. So certain entities, right, that you would usually get items from when they are broken, will not then drop anything. And yeah, so you could prevent players from getting certain items if you don't want them to have it. So you'll notice I could create this whole thing here. But as long as a player is in survival mode, it is impossible for them to pick up any of these paintings. And the reason why I say in survival mode is because in creative mode they could just spawn in their own painting. Let me see if I can fill this up now. This is annoying me. There we go. Alright. So yeah, now breaking any of these paintings will not drop anything. And moving on. Alright, so the next game rule is do fire tick. And do fire tick is a super important game mode. And one that you might use if you're a map maker, or just might use if you don't want people's stuff to burn down. Alright, so what this command does is it'll prevent fire from burning things. So you notice right now fire is burning that log, and eventually it'll start spreading and destroying it, and that's not good. And in fact, if I go game rule random tick speed, not game rule random tick speed 40, or actually 400 probably, 4,000. There you go. You'll notice it all burns out really fast. I basically just sped up the game, and I'll show you how to do that later. But yeah, you don't want that because obviously things burning really fast can be a problem. So what game rule do fire tick false does is it'll essentially prevent any of this from burning. So you notice I'm at the same super fast tick speed, nothing's happening, but the instant I change this to true, it all burns. So it's a super helpful thing, and yeah, you don't want that to be on if you have a lot of wooden buildings typically. I think I currently have it on my survival server, but occasionally when I'm messing around with fire, I turn it off. Alright, so the next game rule is do mob loot, and do mob loot earlier I accidentally confused with do entity drop, but do mob loot actually is about whether or not zombies will drop items. Or in general, just mobs. I'm not sure I said zombies there. But you'll notice here, for example, if I were to kill this zombie, and it might take a couple of tries here, there you go, it dropped rotten flesh. But if I change this to false, no matter how many zombies I kill, they will not drop rotten flesh. You notice they're not dropping rotten flesh, oops, and that zombie's dead. Anyways, point is, they don't drop anything, and yeah, moving on. Alright, so the next game rule is actually do mob spawning, and this is very similar. I'm not going to demonstrate this for you because it could take too long, but do mob spawning essentially depends on how fast mobs spawn. So if you have do mob spawning set, or if they spawn at all. So if you have two mobs spawning, set to true, mobs will spawn. Set to false, mobs won't spawn. Pretty simple. And yeah. So do tile drops is another pretty interesting one. So if I grab myself an axe here and let me head into survival mode, we're going to go ahead and place down some wood here, right? And you'll notice I could grab these blocks. But if I change this to false, you'll notice nothing drops. So essentially it just prevents you from breaking any blocks and getting anything from it. I keep it on true though because, well, you can't do any survival or anything with do tile drops set to false. Alright, so the next game rule is do weather cycle. This is very similar to do daylight cycle. It just prevents weather from occurring. So if you have do daylight cycle set to false, or do weather cycle, set to false while it's raining, it'll always rain. If you have it set to false while it's sunny, it'll always be sunny. Pretty simple. Keep inventory. This is the most useful one in my opinion. And keep inventory I always have on true. In any world I am in, I keep it on true. Because you'll notice if you're on false, you drop all your items, and then you lose them, and they might fall in the void, you might lose them. You don't want that to happen. So by keeping it at true, when you die, you keep all your items. Most useful game rule in my opinion. But there's some other useful ones as well, such as command block output. The next one is log admin commands, and this, as far as I remember, has to do with basically logging your commands in the server console, but obviously I'm not in a server, so I don't have access to a console right now, so that's useless for me. So setting it to false means that admins seeing the console won't be able to see your commands. Alright, so game rule max entity cramming is new to 1.11, and there was a huge amount of buzz about this. You may have heard about it, but if not, I'll go ahead and explain it to you. Alright, so max entity cramming was introduced in 1.11, and the point of it is basically that you can't put a certain amount of entities in an area without them being killed. So let me show you an example of this here, which is, I will go ahead here and set it to 5. Alright, and we're going to grab ourselves some pigs, and summon 5 pigs in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and if I summon one more, you'll notice one just died. So, or 2 just died, I think, even. And actually I need to turn to mob loot to true, just so I can show you here. So yeah, basically what it means, you can't have more than 5 pigs in an area without at least one of them dying, or really any entity in general. And because I'm in here, of course, there's already more. So, yeah, that's a bit of a problematic one. It's by default set to 24, but what you can do is set it to 0, and this means that as many entities can be in one spot as possible, which is basically what it was before 1.11, and yeah, so that's a very important game rule, because otherwise you're going to have a lot of dying entities, and that could be problematic, especially if you have like a sheep farm or something. The next game rule here is mob griefing. This is another super useful one. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to grab my friend Mr. Creeper. And because mob griefing, I believe, currently is set to its default, which is true, you'll notice Creeper blew up that block there. Luckily, I do have a pretty strong area over here, but what you could do is if you change mob griefing to false, then basically it means so that entities can't blow up blocks. Pretty simple. It, I believe, also applies to the Ender Dragon and the Wither and Enderman, so Enderman can't pick up blocks. So the next command we need to cover here appears to be natural regeneration. So game rule natural regeneration essentially decides whether or not you can regenerate health. So if I was in survival mode and I turned off do natural regeneration, or sorry, just natural regeneration, that will essentially prevent me from gaining any health whatsoever. So I would just basically be unable to gain any health unless I use something like a potion or a golden apple, because it's natural regeneration rather than forcing regeneration. And hopefully that doesn't burn down the building, but I already have a backup for this world anyway. Sorry about that. Anyways, so my next command I'm going to be covering, sorry, not command, my next game rule I'm going to be covering, obviously I'm not able to focus a lot right now, but the next command I just messed up again. The next game rule I'm going to be covering is random tick speed. This is one I talked about covering earlier, and actually this probably means I should get rid of the fire that I have next to buildings. But essentially, what game rule random tick speed does is control how fast ticks occur. So the way Minecraft ticks, and I'll explain what ticks are in just a second, occur, is they happen 3 per second by default. And so what that means is that certain things will happen at certain speeds. So, for example, of how fast mobs spawn and despawn, or how fast items spawn or despawn. I believe furnaces are also affected by ticks, but we'll check that in just a second here. So the way I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate this here is we're going to make ourselves a little farm setup as I'm talking here. But so yeah, because you have 3 ticks a second, you could have a lot of ticks occurring, of course, per minute. And because of this, everything's kind of regulated at a certain rate. So, you'll usually have crops all growing at the same rate, which is normal. You don't want crops going at a weird rate because that would confuse everybody. And yeah, but you can't have that happen. So if I plant seeds here, you'll notice it's at 3, which is the default. But say, for example, I were to increase this to a ton, you'll notice it's instantly growing. And I have to set today time for them all to be able to grow. But yeah, essentially, it speeds things up drastically. Or if I drop this item here, as if I were to let it despawn, it would despawn really fast, as far as I remember as well. And yeah, you'll notice if I throw something in the furnace, that isn't sped up for some reason. So there's certain things that are sped up and certain things that aren't sped up. I always have trouble remembering, but yeah, Gamerule random tick speed 3 is the normal one, and yeah. Alright, so random tick speed, of course, super useful, and the next command is reduce debug info, and this essentially changes your F3 menu. So if I do shift F3, you'll notice I see all this information. Gamerule reduce debug info, true, essentially, let's see, I believe, anyways, it does disable certain debug info for most people. As far as I remember, though, it's only for non-ops. I would recommend looking that up just in case, because I could be wrong, but yeah, essentially it'll prevent how much information you'll see in F3. Oh wait, actually I did just see a difference. Let me just double check here. Yeah, you notice where you see chunk relative right there, stay right there in the top left, and if I type false, you notice all of a sudden I see XYZ and all that. So yeah, it is for everybody, it reduces debug info, pretty simple. You do want that typically set to false. Alright, so Gamerules, along with users debug info, there's send command feedback. This is one I typically like on false, actually, and what this means is that when I run a command, it doesn't show, like, for other players, Wavejump games ran command, Gamerules send command feedback, false, or, difficulty, easy, right? It wouldn't show up as set difficulty to easy, which I personally really like. A lot of people hate it, though, because they don't know if their command ran through. I just know the commands well, so it's not typically a problem for me. The show death messages essentially is about showing death messages. I mean, it kind of is self-explanatory. Spawn radius. So this is one I typically like to set to 0, and so Gamerules spawn radius by default is at 10, and basically means you could spawn anywhere with 10 10 blocks around your spawn area. But if I were to say set the spawn radius to zero, and die, I could only spawn on this one cobblestone block. I can't spawn anywhere around it, which is super important if you want to have a very specific spawn point for everybody. And the last command is spectators generate chunks, and if you set this to false, essentially it means that spectators, when they're moving around, cannot generate any chunks. And what that means is that they can't generate new terrain, basically. So if you have that set to false, then they can't really cause as much lag is the point, but of course they can't generate any new terrain. So alright, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I've had a lot of technical difficulties getting this to work. If you have, go ahead and leave a like down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and yeah, once again, thanks for watching. Bye!